Professionalism and the Scotch Professor. More than a decade ago, I read an article in a newspaper about the decline of Scottish football. The journalist bemoaned the fact that football players of the 90s weren't a patch on the players he had watched in the previous 20 years. What could have caused this corruption of the people's game? Players had become accustomed to 90 minutes work for easy money. Of course I've been sleek here. I have deliberately misled you. The article to which I refer was written in the 1890s. It looked back to the great Scottish teams of the 1870s, when professionalism didn't exist and the era was golden. Recalling that piece, it struck me how much had changed and how much had stayed the same in the sport we all love. In an industrialised country like Scotland, the modern game developed in urban areas packed with people who wanted to be amused. Football was well kent and new clubs were springing up to which you could give your devotion. Through football, your life had meaning beyond the 6 days of backbreaking and mundane work. You were not the only one. Everyone in every community flocked to their local teams. It did not take clubs long to realise that the eccentrics standing on the side of the pitch shouting encouragement or abuse were long-term cash cows. It was a swift jump to clubs run by money men who made sure that their pitch had a tall fence built around it. The long wooden walls were punctuated by handy cast-iron turnstiles through which you could enter only by an exchange of silver and gold. If your club was sufficiently entrepreneurial, you might even be able to hand over a little more cash for a covered seat from which you could decorously cheer your heroes. One can imagine the successful clubs and their very happy committee men. The ground had been built for a cost of a few £100, but beyond that, outgoings were known and relatively low. Once a fortnight, money was needed for the team's train journey to the away fixture, and maybe some cash was needed for kit. Clubs probably ponied up the price of the tram so that players could get from their home to the ground for training and treatment. Of course, even that last sentence would not have been acceptable to the austere Corinthians who minded the purse at Queen's Park. It wasn't until the 20th century that Queen's Park players had their kit and tram money covered. England led the way with professionalism. The clubs had become adept at persuading Scotch professors to leave their homes and careers to set up shop in England. I use the latter metaphor advisedly. If you were an amateur player in Scotland, why would you want to move a couple of 100 miles and become an amateur player for Preston North End or Aston Villa? The answer is, you received an off-the-books inducement. It is no surprise that the Whingers of Upton Park Football Club complained to the English FA after their 1-1 cup draw with Preston North End in January 1884. The Lilywhites, who were completely amateur, as the English FA regulations demanded for their FA Cup competition, had 7 Scotsmen in the team. One can only imagine the selflessness that pervaded those 7 Scotch professors to travel to Preston to play for no money. Is it a bird? Is it a plane? No, it's my favourite superhero, Socratic Irony Man. The situation was ludicrous. Fans wanted to see the Scotch professors, and they didn't care how their clubs got round the problem. The English FA set its amateur zealots to work. P&E were tried, found guilty, and expelled from both the cup competition and the National Association. I guess I should have one of my favourite so what questions here, but then I doubt that anyone reading this in the 21st century would agree with the witch hunt, which was designed to harm mostly Scotsmen. Even those troglodytes who smilingly recall Jimmy Creeve's astoundingly witty comments about the citizens of chilly Jockoland will agree that it is a basic human right to be paid for your labour. Let me reframe the context of the nightmare in which the English FA were trapped. Most current English Premiership clubs have a minority of English players in their squads. Why? Because the club owners and their fans want the same thing as Preston North End and Accrington and Burnley wanted 133 years ago. They yearn for the best foreigners in the world, and they are willing to pay them the going rate. The fact that this has harmed the England national team is of no importance to the billionaire owners of a Manchester City or Liverpool. A more realistic attitude was expressed by a Burnley committee man in 1885, defending the extraordinary coincidence of there being 7 Scots in their team. He told the Athletic News that the public would not watch what he described as inferior players. He explained that before his club bowed to footballing reality, we did not pay a single player and nobody came to see us. You would need a heart of stone not to enjoy the delicious irony of the manner of England's infection with the pandemic of professionalism. Scores of Scotch professors needed paid for showing a whole nation how to play the Scottish game. Charles Alcock steered a clever path through the morass. It led to a compromise which brought back teams like Preston, whilst giving some succour to amateurs like Pa Jackson. The SFA saw the English compromise and hardened their hearts against professionalism. Scottish players who were paid to play in England became persona non grata for the national team. Meanwhile, the SFA's member clubs were finding ways to pay their own employees, to prevent them heading across Hadrian's Wall with a cheery "get it up here." But that is a story for another day.